Boa tarde a todos. Obrigada por terem vindo. Good afternoon and thank you for being here. Terry, I will just very briefly make a short presentation of you in Portuguese. E afterwards I will pass the word on to João. Terry nasceu no Reino Unido e emigrou para a Austrália em criança. Foi jornalista no maior jornal do país, The Sydney Morning Herald. Foi correspondente nos Estados Unidos e regressou a Sydney para se tornar jornalista de investigação, correspondente político e colunista. Ao longo da sua carreira escreveu e produziu inúmeros filmes e minisséries como Mad Max 2, O Guerreiro da Estrada, Payback, A Vingança com Mel Gibson e A Verdadeira História de Jack, o Estripador com Johnny Depp. No total recebeu mais de 20 prémios em cinema e televisão. Peregrino, lançado em 2014, aqui em Portugal pela Top Seller em 2015, foi o seu romance de estreia e foi um best-seller internacional imediato, vendido para mais de 25 países. Agora, passados 10 anos, Terry traz-nos o seu tão aguardado segundo romance, Ando Gafanhoto. Terry, I was just talking about how you were a former journalist and screenwriter, where you were born, how you went to Australia and became a newspaper correspondent in New York. You covered stories like Watergate and President Nixon's resignation. That's very impressive. Afterwards, you wrote screenplays for Mad Max and Dead Calm. And then you moved to Los Angeles and you went on to make a major career. You won over 20 film and television awards.
Yes, I did.
You did.
The standard was very low, I think.
We talked about vertical limit earlier, so it wasn't low, the standard. That was amazing. We're very thrilled to have you here today. I was a bit starstruck right there because it's very exciting to finally meet you in person. We didn't know you were in Lisbon, so it was very surprising to know that you lived right here with us. So thank you for being here today. And I'm sure everyone wants to hear all about the Year of the Locust.
No, thank you very much for having me. Not many people do know that I'm in Lisbon. It's because of my fantastic command of the Portuguese language, I think. It's a very difficult language to learn. And if you've seen any of my books, you'd know I struggle with English anyway. So a foreign language would be very, very difficult. But no, I've lived here for 5 years very happily. And my family are with me for part of the year. A couple of my kids, I've got 4 kids, but 2 of them live up in Holland. So my wife shuttles backwards and forwards. But yes, and thank you for coming tonight. I hope it's going to be worthwhile.
João, on to you.
Boa tarde. Meu nome é João Célio Silva e eu escrevo sobre vários livros, inclusive sobre estes Lugares. Em 2015, quando houve a tradução, eu li o Peregrino todo de uma vez só, que eram 700 páginas quase, mas eu li aquilo com todo o prazer. Estes thrillers bem construídos, bem feitos, atraem-me. Então, entre livros ou outro género de romances, dão-me sempre muito prazer. E depois fiquei à espera que saísse o próximo. Achei que seria o Peregrino 2, mas não. Foi o ano do Gafanhoto. E a mesma coisa, li aquilo de seguida, qualquer um dos dois. Eu li, apesar de terem quase 700 páginas, li aquilo em 5, 6 vezes. Não resistia, porque o Terry tem esta vantagem de escrever com muita emoção, com muita ação. E até é um desafio para nós vermos até onde é que ele consegue ir. E neste, ele consegue ir além daquilo que nós imaginaríamos. Este livro é tem o mesmo sentido do anterior, o mesmo tipo de ação. Tem inovações, que eu já lhe vou fazer algumas perguntas sobre isso. E tem várias surpresas. Mas são 600 páginas repletas de ação em que é mesmo impossível parar de ler aquilo. E o que é curioso, num tempo em que nós temos demasiadas notícias sobre terrorismo e terrorismo islâmico, de origem islâmica, é muito interessante ver o que ele acrescenta à visão, porque ele, e inclusive com estas duas guerras em curso, a guerra no terreno da Ucrânia e a guerra em Gaza, é interessante estar a ler o livro e estarmos a lembrar de certos pormenores que vemos nos noticiários. Não é, quando eu digo interessante, é curioso ver, é trágico estar a assistir a isto. Aqui tem um novo agente, que é o agente Kane, que é um super-homem. O homem sofre, e também vou perguntar alguma coisa sobre isso, ele dá cabo do agente ao longo das páginas. Nós, a meio do livro, já estamos com pena de tanto que o agente sofre. Mas é para isso que existem estes agentes importantes. Há uma grande surpresa, ainda não vou falar disso, já lhe falarei as perguntas. E depois há um grande conhecimento da parte do Terry Hayes, que nós ficamos a saber mais do que o que é normal sobre o que está por trás das agências de espionagem, todas essas... E também um grande salto na descoberta de novos armamentos, novas formas de armas, que isso é muito importante. O Terry, como a nossa querida editora já disse, surpreendeu-nos porque estava a viver em Lisboa. Uma grande parte deste livro já foi escrita em Lisboa. E é curioso que o editor dele disse que se notava as partes que tinham sido escritas em Lisboa, porque ele estava debaixo do confinamento, tal como todos nós. E é curioso, se tiverem paciência, se pensarem, enquanto estão a ler, vão notar. Eu notei, depois quando ele me disse, aí eu compreendi porque é que teria notado, que há partes que nós notamos que têm influência do confinamento. Bem, eu vou agora passar a fazer aqui algumas perguntas ao Terry. Ele é muito simpático e, portanto, e depois no final, se tiverem alguma pergunta para fazer, eu creio que ele tem todo o prazer, que ele gosta de falar, portanto não tem qualquer problema, terá todo o prazer em vos responder a perguntas. Hello, Terry. Thanks for this time here in Fnac, a quem agradeço ter-nos recebido, à editora ter convidado e ao Terry ter paciência para estar aqui a falar connosco. We are here in Fnac, good bookshop. You have here every books in English also, so you can choose. You can walk. He lives near. You can walk here and buy some books in English. I already saw the one that I have to buy after. Let me ask you one first thing, because I told to the audience that you live here in Portugal, and I would like that if to be in Portugal, to live in Portugal, has some impact on the new book, The Year of the Locust?
Well, yes, it did in the most unexpected fashion, and that was this. I arrived in Portugal just as COVID, or in Lisbon, just as COVID was starting its terrible journey across the world. And so anyway, that was one of the reasons I came here, because I was in England and I did not wish to sit out a virus in London. Miserable weather, miserable people, bad traffic, terrible food. And I'd lived there and I was born there, so I'm allowed to say these things. So anyway, I said to my wife, who was down in Australia with the kids and the dogs, I said, I think I moved to Lisbon. And she said to me, have you ever been to Lisbon? I said, no. And she said, well, that's an interesting idea. I said, well, I'll go over and have a look. So I did. I came over, and for any of you that might have read Pilgrim, you'd know that it was about the recreation of the smallpox virus. So I actually learned a lot about viruses, more than most people would ever want to know about viruses, in order to write the book. So she said to me, well, is it worthwhile going to Lisbon? Because, you know, we don't know how bad this COVID thing's going to be. I said, look, it's all going to be over in a couple of months. I said, it will be, because, you know, I know a lot about viruses. I'm an expert. And she said, yeah, well, that's true. If you think it's going to be over in a couple of months. I said, so just go over there, stay there for a couple of months. Weather's nice. People say that people are very friendly, and it'll be interesting. So anyway, that's what I did. I came over here, and then, of course, I saw Donald Trump on TV saying that COVID was nothing to worry about, and only 13 Americans would die from COVID. So I'm staring at the TV. So I called my wife and I said, I think we're in really deep shit. And she said, why? I said, because Trump says we got nothing to worry about. So clearly this is going to be a disaster. And it was, as we know. So I decided to stay in Portugal, and COVID got worse and worse. And I was living about a kilometre or two up the road where I still live, and I had no furniture. I had a blow-up mattress on the floor. I had a desk chair and a desk that I got on the day that IKEA closed. That's what I had. So I sat there and worked, and I kept writing Locust. When I finished it, and this is about, did it have an influence on me? When I finished it, I was talking to my editor in London, every couple of days, and telling him how I was going, and he's a friend of mine, just chatting and that. And anyway, I finally submitted the manuscript, and he read it through, and he was very complimentary, thank God. And he said, but you got one problem. I said, what's that? He said, I can tell from the manuscript when COVID was starting to get really bad. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, you never spoke to anybody, did you? I said, no. I didn't see my family for 2.5 years. I was forbidden to return to Australia. All Australians were forbidden. It wasn't just me. And they were not allowed to leave. So I didn't see them. So, of course, it was very depressing. I did not know a soul in Portugal. I did not speak the language. As you may recall, you couldn't even go and sit in the park because they had that yellow tape all across. I used to absolutely live for the moment of going to El Corte Inglés, to the supermarket, and hoping the person behind the Perspex screen would talk to me. I just think I would walk along the checkouts thinking, now, which one will speak English? There's got to be one of these people that speaks English. Well, of course, I always got it wrong. And that. So it was very, very difficult. It was a really... No, I wasn't. Yeah, I mean, people were dying, so I don't want to overstress it. But he could tell as my emotional and mental state declined. He said, your hero character becomes so miserable. He said, I read it and felt like slitting my wrists. I could tell that you were very similar. So he said, I think you better lighten it up. And I went back and read it, and I was shocked myself. I was shocked at the trajectory. I said to my wife after the book was published, not so much about the book, but she knows about this, and she said, how do you feel? Like, not about the book. I said, to be honest, I said, I don't think I'll ever recover. I really don't. I said it was an incredibly confronting time. I said it was confronting for everybody in the world, but most people had family or a network of people that they could rely on. Every time I got a scratch in my throat, I thought, if I have to go to hospital and I don't speak the language and I don't understand the medical system, and if it gets really bad, my family won't even be allowed to come to say goodbye. I'll be lying in a hospital room in Lisbon, and that'll be the end. So I think all of that reflected in the character. So I got to work and gave him a few jokes and made him less depressed. And and I hope that nobody realises now, but I wouldn't want to go through it again.
Well, let me ask you, why so many years between Pilgrim and the Year of the Locust? It was 30 years or something like that.
10 years, yeah. You're going to be sorry you asked that. Bear with me, because this is really miserable. I was, a Hollywood screenwriter, and, it's a terrible life, but you get paid an awful lot of money. So it's, always that balance between, an extravagant life, living in a beautiful part of LA with, knowing lots of famous people. I can tell you a great story about Jim Carrey later. But it's not very emotionally or intellectually satisfying, or at least it wasn't to me. So I decided to be a novelist, which I'd always wanted to be. I just got diverted, and sold my soul to the devil and went to Hollywood and yada yada. So I decided to write Pilgrim. And I was really excited about it because I loved the freedom of being able to write a novel compared to writing a movie. It's very different. Anyway, I was about 250 pages into Pilgrim, and far enough in not to be able to abandon it, but not so far that I could see the end. So it was in the terrible period of writing it. And I was a migrant child. I left England and went to live in Australia when I was 5. And there were just the 4 of us, Mum, Dad, myself and my brother. And very close-knit family because of that. Because, it was an alien landscape and we knew nobody. So we sort of hung out together. Anyway, I'm writing Pilgrim in Sydney, and my brother arrived and told me that he had cancer. So I asked him what sort of cancer, and I knew enough about it to know that was it. So the doctors gave him a year to live, and 10 months later he died. So that was very difficult. He was 59 years old. About 8 or 9 months later, it's difficult to remember. But about 8 months later, I had to, unfortunately, stand in a hospital corridor in Sydney and tell the doctors to turn off the life support machines of my father, who was elderly and was suffering from organ failure. So I did that, and so Dad passed away, and then 6 months later my mother died. They'd been married for 64 years or something, and she just never got over it. Firstly, one of her sons, then her husband, and so she died. So within the space of about 15 months, I buried the whole family. There was just me left. But I could never stop writing because I had 4 children of my own, and I'd given up this very well-paid lifestyle to take a gamble on writing a novel, and I couldn't stop. So I didn't. So I wrote on and on and on, and I finished the book. And I think most publishers who'd bought the book had forgotten about me completely. But anyway, I finished it, and I sent it off to a gentleman called Bill Scott Carr in London, who's the commissioning editor and the publisher of Transworld. And Bill called me, and I will never forget this. I was standing out in the back garden of our house in Sydney, and it was a beautiful night, and the kids were on the tennis court practicing cricket and all of this, and Bill called me, and he said, well, I think it's going to be huge. I said, yeah? He said, yeah. He said, I think Pilgrim's going to be really huge around the world. He said, I'm hearing from the people in-house here, I'm talking to other people I've known, that I've asked them to read the manuscript. He said, get ready. He said, I don't think your life's ever going to be the same again. Anyway, he said, you don't sound very excited by it. I said, oh, no, I am. Believe me, I really am. I mean, I've been touched by God. It would have been a childhood dream to write a halfway decent novel. He said, well, what's wrong? I said, well, it's very bittersweet. It's very much like life, I said, there's only 4 people in the world that knew that when I was a kid, I wanted to write a well-received, well-selling novel. I said, that's me, my mum and dad, and my brother. They were the only ones that ever knew. They were the only ones that were there at the beginning. I said, they're all dead. They'll never hold that book in their hands. I'll never talk to them. I said, so, it's a strange feeling. It's never gone away. And that's so what occurred was that once I knew that the book was going to be okay, I took a long time to think about my brother and my parents and my childhood. And my mother was unfortunately psychologically not at all a well person. It was a very, very difficult childhood. And she did her best, but she was just, she wasn't capable of it. And so I never blame her for this. My father was of a generation that, you went to work and a woman stayed at home and kept the house. So he was not sensitive to any of these difficulties. It was very hard growing up. And, I thought a lot about this after Pilgrim had been published. And I looked at my own kids and I thought, okay, you're going to have the best childhood you could ever imagine. Not financially, not like that, but just in the engagement of their mother and father. And I figured that I could always write another book, but I could never, ever get those years back with those kids. And so I never missed a cricket match. I never missed a horse riding lesson, a performance of Aladdin, which I'd break out in a cold sweat every time I hear that word. I sat through so many of them. I was there at school pickup. I helped them with their homework. I yelled at them a lot. And it was the right thing to do. So it took a long time. Oh, well, thank you.
Ele fala da forma como escreve, né? Para quem já leu os livros dele, há sempre muita emoção, muita ação, e o Terry não tem problema de contar histórias. A única coisa que ele não gosta muito de contar são histórias sobre os atores que ele conheceu em Hollywood e que normalmente todos os jornalistas lhes perguntam. Eu ainda não lhe vou perguntar, já vou tentar, porque ele conheceu imensos atores, tanto do episódio 2 como o filme 1, 2 e 3 do Mad Max, o Death Calm e outros filmes que ele fez. Aliás, ele foi um dos que contribuiu para aquele filme O Corvo, que agora teve tem um novo filme. Portanto, é um bom contador de histórias. E estes dois livros, apesar de serem ligeiramente diferentes, nunca fogem da ação, que é aquilo que quem gosta de ler um bom thriller vai encontrar. Terry, we can say that you write in a cinematic way. It was impossible to do different?
Yeah. I don't know, it's just the way I think. In order to write the chapters or the scenes or the characters, I have to visualize them. Now, you would think that's a big advantage in writing screenplays. And well, it's not. That's the strange irony of it, really. That's the director and cinematographer's job to do that. If you ever do some really great movie called Unforgiven, which I think Clint Eastwood won the Oscar for, but it was written by a guy I know called David Webb Peoples. When you read the screenplay, there is no description in it whatsoever. It is just so lean. William Money is a pig farmer in the Nebraska wilderness or something. I don't know, I can't remember how it starts. 2 children, 30 pigs. Man arrives. That's it. And you look at it, you read it, and David is a really great guy and a very good screenwriter. I read it and I thought, Jesus, David, you must have done this in like a week. This is so straightforward, so simple. But he understood something that I didn't understand and that I can't come to grips with. And that is that he just the facts, nothing but the facts. With me, oh no, I got to sit there and think about what the Nebraska plains are really like. I've got to research pigs. I've got to know what William Money looks like. What's he doing? Why did he build this hut in the middle of nowhere? Where did he get the pigs from? Who are these children? What happened to his wife? Who's this man that's arriving on a horse? Now I'm down the rabbit hole, and it's a long way out. Well, when I get it sorted out, I want to describe it. I want to make you, when you're reading it, whether it's a screenplay or a novel, I want you to feel you're there. I want you to feel it's happening to you. And that's not Hollywood. Hollywood is, hey, this is a great idea. 40 million kids a year buy Barbie. Why don't we make a movie of Barbie? Well, I'd sit there and say, well, what's the story? They'd say, who cares? Now, the history of Hollywood is littered with people that have gone into executive meetings, screenwriters or directors, producers, and have said, do you know one of the biggest sports in the world, probably the biggest sport, is football? So we have billions of people around the world who are interested in football. Let's make a football movie. And some idiot who gets paid a lot of money and has a really lovely office at one of the studios says, great idea, let's do it. And they've made plenty of them. The problem is the people that love football like to go to football games. They don't necessarily like to go to the movies to see football. It's a different experience. So, you have lots and lots of people there in Hollywood who are only interested in the concept. The concept's Barbie. The concept is, a Western set in outer space. Star Wars. So that's all they look at. They don't give a damn about the writing. Well, I do. Every screenplay I've ever written, I thought, this has got my name on it, and it's going to be good. It's going to make you read this and think, I can't stop. So, Hollywood screenwriters, the best of them are earning $2 or $3 million a script, plus a share of any profits they make, which is difficult to get hold of thanks to the studio accounting. And some of them are writing 2 or 3 a year. So, you're talking to men and women who make $6, $7, $8 million a year. And they know how to do it. Well, I was lucky. I made a couple of, I think, pretty good movies. And I was proud of the screenplays. I was really proud. And to this day I am. I haven't written anything that I don't feel I'm ashamed to have my name on it. But that is not how you make $6 or $7 or $8 million a year. It doesn't work like that. So I write movies cinematically. When they told me, or I realised, I'm going to write Pilgrim, and it doesn't have to be 128 pages. It could be 700 pages. Well, it was like letting Saddam loose in the arms factory, It was sort of like, wow. I'm one of those kids at Willy Wonka. And that. So I wrote it cinematically, just like I would have written a screenplay. But not to make it a screenplay, but that same thing. And the same with Locust, to make you feel that I'm there. And I think there's books that you read, and you sit here, and the book's over there, and you read it. There's movies that you see, you sit here, and the movie's happening up on the screen. But then there are some books and some movies where you're in the page or you're in the screen, and when that guy's pulling the gun out, he's not going to shoot Clint Eastwood, he's going to shoot you. And that's a big difference. And that, to me, is a very difficult thing to do. But I try.
Este livro, tal como o anterior, também tem um vilão terrível. Eu não sei qual dos dois é pior. Acho que este consegue ser um pouco pior. E isso é uma peça interessante nestes dois livros, é o papel do vilão. Terry, you have the role of the villain here. It's terrible. In Pilgrim also they were terrible. You prefer the villain or the hero?
Yeah, very good question. Everybody says the hero and they're wrong. Walt Disney, God bless him. I mean, he gave us Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney once said a very interesting thing about movies. He said, no movie is ever better than the villain. And that's true. In my experience, that's true. If you read spy thrillers or adventure books written mostly by Americans, and, you know, I'm not saying they're all like this, but many are, the hero is always an American. Me too, I put my hand up, I'm guilty of that. But the hero is always just incredibly wonderful. And the villain is sort of like, well, yeah, he's walking around with an axe and a decapitated head in the other hand, and you sort of get the message, don't you? This is not a good person. But the problem with that is that the hero has to have a very high bar to clear. If he's going to go in contest with a man or a woman, boy, that person had better be brilliant. That person had better be incredible. Because you want the hero to exceed all of our expectations in order to defeat that person. So the better you make your villain, the better you make your hero. You devalue the villain? Well, I could do it, couldn't I? I mean, a guy comes through over there with an axe and a decapitated head. I might have a chance. I might. But when somebody comes in who's more like Hannibal Lecter from, Silence of the Lambs, you're thinking, my God, this is a really evil person, but boy, is he smart. And that becomes a whole different ball game. And if you remember in that movie, Jodie Foster was totally intimidated by him. She was overwhelmed on every level by him. But she rose to the occasion. That's what I tried to do. Somebody way smarter than me once said, to understand is to forgive. George Santayana. To understand is to forgive. So that's where I start with the villains. I don't really think that anybody is born evil. Well, some people who work for Hollywood studios, we'll leave them out of it. But I don't think people are born evil. But I do think they're created. And my interest is to find those circumstances, to try to come up with the wound that never healed. So I start there, and I try to understand them. And if I can understand them, you go through and maybe we all learn something, a little bit about the nature of evil and how, people that do terrible things were created. They weren't born. So, I like the villains. But, after I finished Pilgrim, my wife read it all the way through. She'd read them bits and pieces, but she'd never read the entire book. And so she was in bed and she finished reading it, and I came up from the office and I said, well, what do you think? She said, it's fantastic. She said, you've got no idea. She said, you really have no idea how good it is. I mean, she's married to me. What else is she going to say? Oh, it's a heap of crap. You just waste a few years and be like, okay. And I bet, it's interesting. She reads far more than I do. And I said, what did you think of the hero, Scott Murdoch or whatever his name is? That's for the book I'm writing, Pilgrim 2 at the moment. But I said, what do you think of him? She's fantastic. She said, just a fantastic character. I said, oh, that's really good. She said, I loved him. I just loved him so much. I said, oh, this is very encouraging. And she said, well, of course I do. It's you. I said, what? I'm not a spy. I don't indulge in extrajudicial killings. I don't do all these. She said, nah. She said, it's you. She said, it's the same morally conflicted person, the same person that is agonizing all the time about what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing. Your sense of humor and your sense of adventure. I don't know whether she was right. I mean, maybe there's something in that. But the point is, if I make the villain really good, I can invest the hero with certain things that I admire about myself. Now, not many, but there's a couple that I could put in there, and I find it much easier to write the hero. And somewhere in Pilgrim it says that our hero's attitude to life is that intelligence was his only real drug. That was the thing that he got really high on. And I think that to some extent was my upbringing, to try to admire intelligence and intellectual achievement and all of those things. And so I feel that if I've got a very intelligent villain, then I can find something in myself, as far as the hero is concerned, that I can admire about him and about myself. So, yeah, it's those two, it's the same coin, but the different sides. On one side you've got the hero, on the other side you've got the villain, and you better really, really pay attention and give them their due.
I think that Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and the character of Harrison Ford wouldn't be so great if there was not the Darth Vader.
That's a perfect example. I mean, let's face it, Luke Skywalker's a pretty boring guy. He's very sort of very American, sort of middle-class kid. Okay, he's living on this other planet and everything, but he could be on a white picket fence, nice suburban home, living with his aunt and uncle with all this mysterious stuff in his background that, it's Darth Vader that makes it. When, he comes in that Nazi-inspired helmet and the long black clothes, and then you've got, James Earl Jones's voice through that synthesizer. You think, oh my God. Oh, I mean, that was, for kids of a certain age, I'm sure that caused huge psychological damage to them. But yeah, so it gave Luke and Han Solo and Princess Leia something worthy, a worthy opponent. I mean, and we see that in football. I mean, if all of us here went out and played, Argentina, I don't think it would be much of a game. I think Argentina would probably beat us. But boy, when you see, Argentina play Brazil or Spain or somebody, then wow, it's a real contest. So I often think of that, and I love football. I often think of that when I'm doing the books, I think, okay, come on, lift the game, So yeah, you're right.
This is not that one, the locus here. It's not the conventional spy book. And it's a little spoiler, but it's not dangerous. You have, in the end, a great surprise, a trip to the future. Why did you change the rules of the genre?
Because I'm old and I get bored. And I figure if we don't try something new, we ain't going to get very far, are we? I mean, Bob Dylan went electric, didn't he? You know, he was a great folk singer who walks out on stage with an electric guitar, and you'd honestly think the world was going to end. You know, the spy thriller genre, and I don't think of it as a spy thriller. I think of it much more as just an adventure story, a real adventure story. And the spy thrillers can be pretty dusty. You know, there's been a lot of them written, and most of us know how it's going to go. You know, if you're interested in that genre and you've read widely in it, then you sort of know how it's all the sequence of events is going to unfold. So I wanted to change it. I wanted to do something very different. And I figured that if I did my job well enough, that the readers would go with me. They'd say, well, this is bold and this is unique. And I think it all comes back to make sense at the end. I think it makes sense as we go through, but I think it pays off at the end. And in very brutal fashion, try not to give too many spoilers away. He has a family, he has a wife, and she's pregnant. And to be honest, I wanted to kill her, because that would be the most confronting thing. But I knew that would be the end of the story. Because if I've done my job properly with her and with him, no reader would ever forgive me. They'd say, this is just too negative. Great saying in Hollywood, sad is good, depressing is bad. And I knew this would be depressing. So I came up with a way that he could foresee and in a strange way experience her death and then prevent it. And so, putting on my hat of being, very venal and wanting the book to be a success, I thought, well, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can kill her and then not kill her. And so that's what I did. And I think, to me, it worked very well. But it gave me one other great advantage of doing it like this. It meant that everybody in the world doubted our hero. Everybody thought he's suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. He's really gone off the reservation. So what it allowed me to do was to place him in that situation. And the only person that believed him was the person who was completely opposed to his life in the intelligence agency, and that was his wife. And all the way through, she'd been saying, this is not a good way to lead your life. This is not a good, use of your years on earth. And then towards the end, she says, nobody else believes you, but I do. Go on this final leg of the mission. And that to me was real heroism on both their parts, because they both knew that it was highly unlikely he would ever return. They were both fairly certain that he wouldn't be coming back. And to me, that's real courage. That's people who knowingly go into incredible danger with the expectation of losing their own life, but do it anyway. I think that's real morality. I think that's real courage. So the only way I could square all of that, get all of that to work, was to do this sort of trick, which does take you by surprise. But, it's a book. It's not cancer research. I mean, I didn't destroy the cure for cancer. I went on a journey. I just hope readers all around the world have, gone on the journey with me. I hope so.
One more spoiler. but this one very little. You have a scene of two children crucifixion.
Yes.
Why? How did you manage to remember to do this?
Yeah, it's a good crucifixion. It is. There's no doubt. It's a good few chapters. Unfortunately, our hero has gone into Iran, into the very bad lands of Iran, to meet a courier for a terrorist organisation. Now, if you remember, Osama bin Laden was tracked through a courier. Most terrorist organisations do not use cell phones because the NSA is listening to everything in the world, and encryption does not work when you've got people like that listening. So they tend to, from your mouth to my ear. So there's this courier, and he makes contact with the CIA with a view to revealing lots of secrets for money. The bad guys, the terrorists, find out that this is what he's done. So they come up, our villain comes up with the brilliant idea of crucifying him. Why? Because, of course, they're of the Islamic faith, and crucifixion is the great symbol of Christianity. So what they're actually saying is, you're no better than a Christian. You are really the worst. So it had a good sort of depth to why they would do this. It wasn't gratuitous, them doing this. It also says somewhere in the book that part of life in the Middle East is that it's not just that people must be punished, everybody else must be warned. So it's a public crucifixion. Okay, so now I've got the pieces. Yeah, it's public. I know where it's happening in Iran. I know it's going to be really bad because the guy's wife and two little children are brought along to witness it, and they're chained to the ground to watch their husband and their father being crucified. So I'm thinking, oh yeah, well, this is going to be all right. This is going to work. And I could see the scene. It was like, one of those old masters' paintings, all in those faded colours and the wind blowing across and the sand and the heat. Terrible. But the question is, what happens in a crucifixion? So my dear friend Mel Gibson came to my rescue many years beforehand. He didn't know he was going to rescue, but I've known Mel forever. I often joke with him, look, I knew you before you were famous. And I did. So I was in Los Angeles many years ago. And he called me up and he said, do you want to come down and have lunch? I'm down downtown LA doing a movie called $1 Million Hotel, which is a weird art movie by a German director. And so I went down and had lunch with him. So we're sitting down having lunch, and he says to me, what do you know about crucifixion? So I said, well, I know about the famous one. And of course, Mel is a very devout member of the Catholic Church with some very strange ideas about problems with the Pope, I think would be the kindest way to say it. And so I think, this is going to be a weird lunch. And he says, well, I'm going to tell you about a crucifixion, Terry. I said, oh, yeah, good, thanks. I think, can we just have lunch? And he says, it's not an execution. He said, people have got it all wrong. It's not an execution. It's death by torture. Well, for the next couple of hours, he explained to me in absolute, perfect detail everything that happens to your body as you hang on the cross. And one of the things is that your organs collapse down into your diaphragm, and you can breathe in, but it's an absolute agony to breathe out. And so you actually end up, if you're fortunate, there's Longinus is not there with his spear, you actually suffocate to death. But by then, every other organ in your body's collapsed. It's just awful. So I said to him, I mean, he's a very strange and very misunderstood person, but I said to him, why, Mel? Why? Has your wife caught you doing things you shouldn't be doing again? And I know Robin very, very well. She's a saint. She is a saint. And so he said, no. He said, I'm doing a movie. I said, what you doing a movie about? He said, about the crucifixion, Passion of the Christ. So, a couple of years go by, and the movie's a huge hit. He gets into all this trouble from, people of the Jewish faith and yada, yada, yada. And so many, many more years pass, and I'm doing my own crucifixion scene. And I think, thank you, Al. Thank you. One thing I don't have to research, and that. So I wrote the scene, and yes, I find the whole thing quite horrifying. But it had one other element to it that really attracted me, and that is that our hero is on a ridgeline, and he's looking down at this. And there's the wife and the two children, chained to the ground watching this. And they've got little bowls of water in front of them. Why? Because the bad people, the bad guy, did not want them to die of thirst, which would have happened in about 24 hours. Because, we're in Iran in summer, 36 hours maybe. No. They gave them water in order they could stay alive, and they would starve to death, which would take weeks. So he realises this. He's up on the ridgeline. He's got a rifle with a telescopic sight, and there's 3 guards. But he's a CIA agent. And the rules are that once the mission is compromised, you turn around and go home. That's it. You never get involved. But he's a man. And what sort of man is he? So he has a very clear choice. He figures he's good enough. He's not the best shot in the world, but he's good enough. He can take those 3 guards out. And then the other people, this large crowd of people, will release the wife and the children, and he'll save their lives. But in order to do that, he has to be in absolute defiance of everything that he has learned and all of the rules of an intelligence agency behind enemy lines. So it's a moral dilemma. What does he do? Does he act as a human being? Or does he act as an intelligence agent? How that resolves itself tells you more about him than anything else that I could have written. You learn a lot about him by that decision that he makes. And this is not a spoiler, because we all know, don't we? Of course he saves the wife and the kids. I mean, otherwise he's irredeemable. And that. So the whole crucifixion was a matrix of very interesting things to me, and maybe I would never have thought of it. I've never seen Passion of the Christ. Torture porn is not my thing. But thank you, Mel, for taking me through it.
Isto já vai longe, já ultrapassámos a hora. Alguém quer fazer uma pergunta ao Terry? Estejam à vontade. Eu já vi algumas pessoas aí com o livro na mão, portanto devem gostar. Ninguém tem curiosidade nenhuma para satisfazer? Claro.
O que eu queria basicamente saber é como é que decorre o processo de investigação e que credibilidade é que tem tudo o que ele põe por escrito.
Yes. He wants to know how credible, how reliable are your characters, your research? How can you get all of these to put in the book?
Yeah,
Be reliable.
I'm reasonably reliable. I mean, you know, when you're writing a book like this, I always say you've got to tell a million small truths to make the readers believe the one big lie. And the one big lie is that there's this guy who is going behind enemy lines into Iran and he's going to meet this courier, except the courier gets crucified. I've got to get you to believe that. So how do I do that? Well, I tell you that he's got 3 pack horses. So I give him names, because that's what people do. Then I research what saddles pack horses in Iran use or Pakistan use. I've got to get all the details right. Now, I can do it because of Google. Google's a wonderful resource. But the problem is, and this is the irony of this, every reader's got access to Google. I was in America doing an event like this, and then I had to sign some books afterwards. And this guy came up to me, middle-aged guy. He looked normal, and he's got a copy of Pilgrim, and he wants me to sign that and sign Locust. And I'm looking at his copy of Pilgrim. It's got hundreds, I'm not kidding, hundreds of colour-coded little post-it notes all down the pages. And I said, "What's this?" He said, I annotate every page. I said, "What?" He said, "I annotate every page. Whenever you mention a weapon, I go on Google and have a look, and I make a note about whether you're right or not." Now, this is crazy. I started to get worried. I thought, my God. And he said, "And what, you sort of work out whether I'm right or wrong?" He said, "Yeah, that and some other things, like, this is a good moment, but this moment doesn't work." I thought, okay. I said, "Do you give me a score, like at the end?" He said, "Well, sort of." I said, "How do I do?" He said, 8 out of 10. I said, "Well, gee, that's pretty good." Now, this is the problem. In Pilgrim, I talk about an event, a rave party that is happening at some Roman ruins off the Turkish coast. I think it was the Turkish coast. Okay. And in order for the party to happen, the ruins have to be exposed. So I talk about the tide dropping to expose the ruins. Well, my God. You honestly would have thought I'd killed somebody. Amazon is full of people saying, "What a moron. What a complete idiot." Doesn't he know that there are no tides in the Mediterranean? Now, it really pissed me off, because there are tides in the Mediterranean. Every body of water is subject to the gravitational pull of the moon. What the people meant was, and a number of them mention it, that if you're sailing the Mediterranean, you don't have to worry too much about tidal flow, because we're not talking about the Atlantic or the Pacific here. So their point was that I said something which, largely I think they were right, but in the detail they were wrong. There's a place in Tripoli where you get a tidal fall of about 12 feet just because of the configuration of the underwater landscape. So, my God, person after person's mentioned this. So, under my wife's name, not mine, I answered a couple of them, and I said, "Well, at the front of the book, it says a work of fiction. It does not say this should be used as a sailing manual if you are thinking of sailing the Mediterranean." So, it is a work of fiction. When I get into a corner or I cannot find any research on it, I make it up. And I think I have the right to do that. The trick is, if I can't find any research on it, I'm hoping that you can't either. Now, there's scenes in Locust which are set in the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And Baikonur is an incredible place. It's where Yuri Gagarin took off from and became the first man ever that we know of to leave Earth atmosphere. And if it had not been part of the Soviet Union, he would be up there with Neil Armstrong. There's no doubt. I mean, it was an incredible achievement to be the first person to ever leave our planet. That happened to Baikonur. So I like that. Because I like Baikonur because I like things like that. Aspects of history and that, not as widely known perhaps as I think they should be. So I'm researching Baikonur. The internet's an incredible thing, and the world is full of complete lunatics. I know this because somebody has got, and hundreds, if not thousands of pages on this website that they formed about Baikonur Cosmodrome. And I don't mean like some photos of it. I mean like in 1958, on the 12th of April, a Soyuz rocket, developing a thrust of 4,000 pounds per square inch or whatever, comes through all this, everything ever launched from Baikonur. And there's a lot of launch pads. He told me how many miles of sewage line there is in Baikonur, how they get their electricity. So, of course, it was wonderful for me. It was just wonderful. So, of course, I made sure Baikonur was right, because I can guarantee you, my friend in America with his annotated pages has found that website. He has found it. And he's saying, oh, no, Terry, you moron. It's 560 kilometres of sewage line and you've got 460. So, I get a bad mark there. But yes, I make it as reliable as possible in order to get you to suspend disbelief, to have confidence in me. But please, don't rely on it. If you're sailing the Mediterranean, don't listen to me.
Como a editora bem fez, escreveu aqui que é um livro que valeu a pena esperar. Para quem gosta de thrillers, está aqui um dos melhores do ano. Muito obrigado. Thank you, Terry. Obrigado à Penguin e obrigado à Fnac por nos permitirem conversar aqui um pouco. E como já viram, o Terry Hayes é um bom contador de histórias. E se nós ficássemos aqui mais 3 horas, podem ter certeza que ele contaria imensas histórias. Que há a história de umas armas que aparecem aqui no final, há a inteligência artificial que aparece de uma forma muito interessante, há muitas emoções, há muitas missões impossíveis. O Tom Cruise ainda não deve ter lido isto, senão já se tinha posto a fazer. Esta história do cosmódromo de Baikonur é impressionante, aquilo que é inventado em função do cosmódromo. Portanto, são umas boas horas, 12, 15 horas pelo menos, passadas a ler isto. Quem quiser pedir um autógrafo ao Terry Hayes, estejam à vontade, que ele terá todo o prazer em dar, penso eu. Okay, thank you, Terry.
And thank you for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you.